Oh my god, did you hear? Tragedy has struck. A wrestler on a wrestling show that involved tables, ladders, and chairs got injured. Can you believe such a thing could possibly happen? Well, because somebody got injured, that means that there's someone else to blame. So let's start pointing some fingers. It's got to be Charlotte. Charlotte Flair is to blame. She threw her into a barricade, and that was reckless and dangerous and has never ever happened before in the world of wrestling. Then again, Becky Lynch also hit her over the head with a monitor, but it's Becky Lynch's fault. Becky Lynch is the person responsible for this terrible injury. But then again, Charlotte Flair also hit her with a monitor. It's back to Charlotte Flair again. It's her fault. Charlotte Flair is the reason that Kairi Sane got injured. But then again, I mean, it was ultimately it's the promoter's fault, isn't it? Because Vince McMahon is the promoter of this organization, therefore it's his fault because he booked the match, and ultimately everything lies at his feet. But then again, he may not have used Kairi Sane and Asuka and Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch if NXT hadn't existed, because he may not have signed them. It's Triple H's fault that this happened. But then again, Triple H wouldn't have had NXT if Vince McMahon hadn't given him the go-ahead to start a developmental territory and then train people up and bring in stars. And so again, it's back to Vince McMahon's fault. It's ultimately his fault. He's the reason this happened. But then again, if WCW and ECW hadn't folded back in 2000 and 2001, then none of this would have happened. There would have been alternatives to this. So obviously it's Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo's fault. It's their fault. But then again, they wouldn't have come about if Vince McMahon hadn't monopolized the wrestling industry, because all of the regional territories were so far behind the times. They were easily bought out because he was so far ahead of them in terms of production and talent development and Hollywood stars. But then again, you see, wrestling wouldn't have fallen behind the times if it wasn't founded on a regional promotional system that had really kind of evolved over time since Abraham Lincoln won the Civil War and the carnivals popped up and started touring the country. So basically, if the South had won the Civil War, then Kairi Sane wouldn't have gotten injured at TLC. It's the South's fault for not winning the Civil War. But then again, and ultimately, professional wrestling wouldn't have come around if there weren't wrestling to begin with. So actually, it's the ancient Greeks' fault. Because if they hadn't done wrestling in the Olympics as one of the four main categories of competition that they had at the time, then Kairi Sane would have got injured at TLC, or Charlotte Flair wouldn't have come up from NXT, and Becky Lynch wouldn't have come up from NXT, and NXT wouldn't exist because the WWE wouldn't exist, because Vince McMahon wouldn't exist, because no, actually, you can't really blame the ancient Greeks for that, because they had a kind of a culture based around the heroic myths that had been established by the Epic of Gilgamesh. That was it, yeah. So ultimately, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the first recorded stories in human history, is ultimately to blame for. Wait. What was I talking about?